Bivariate presentation by Miami 2012 Poll 242. For this assignment, my research question will be, do the people in Malawi support democracy? I will study this question by looking at three independent variables: present living conditions in Malawi, participation in the electoral process, and Malawi's current economic conditions. For this study, I've chosen Afrobarometer 2005-2006 as my data set, and as I mentioned, I will be focusing specifically on Malawi. The study has 1,200 cases, and my analytical approach will consist of the Reliability Analysis, crosstabs, chi-squared, and ANOVA. For my first independent variable, I have hypothesized that the better the living conditions for respondents in Malawi are, the more likely they will support democracy. For the second independent variable, I have hypothesized that the respondents who have registered and voted in the last election will be more likely to support democracy. And lastly, for the third independent variable, I have hypothesized that if respondents believe in Malawi's economic state is doing well, then they will be more likely to support democracy. My rationale for these hypotheses come from Large Journal. For the first hypothesis, I assume good living conditions will result in supporting democracy because, in Large Journal, she states that as democracy progresses in Malawi, living conditions have become better as well. For instance, Large says the percentage of underweight children decreased dramatically from 1995 to 2006 due to certain aspects of democratization. Therefore, I believe that if people think that they will lead a better lifestyle as a result of democratizing, then they will support democracies. For the second hypothesis, I assume that voting in the last election means you are more likely to support for democracy since the electoral system is a main institution for democratic consolidation. In other words, a democratic political regime is more likely to last if people are voting during elections. As a result, if one votes, then it makes sense to say that those voting also support democracy. And lastly, for my third hypothesis, I assume that good economic conditions in Malawi will lead to support for democracy. As Lipset and Lars argue, the better the nation does economically, the greater the chance there is to sustain democracy. Therefore, assuming that everybody wants a growing economy, they will also support democracy. For the reliability analysis, I chose 6 indicators that will measure my dependent variable. I believe that trusting in the President, Electoral Commission, ruling party, military, police, and the courts of law will mean you support democracy as you trust your leaders. My reliability analysis gave me a Cronbach alpha score of 0.8246, and since the score is higher than 0.6, I conclude that the questions I chose are related enough to combine an index. In addition to the alpha, I've included the frequency distribution of the dependent variable index. The mean is at 2.061. The standard deviation is at 0.824, which tells us the degree of variation within a variable on the basis of the average deviation from the mean. The kurtosis is a measure of how much of a peak there is, and the negative kurtosis of negative 1.518 implies that it is a much flatter distribution. The skew measures the symmetry of the distribution, and in this case, a negative skew of 0.114 means that the tail is a little longer on the left side with a few values on the right side of the mean. As we can see in this crosstab using the highlighted boxes, there is no specific pattern that is evident in this relationship. For example, all the high percentage values are not showing a positive or negative relationship. Therefore, we can conclude that there is no relationship between these two variables. Our measure of association, Kendall tau c, which is used for ordinal rectangular data, also validates this conclusion for us, as the value of the measure of association is negative 0.00756, once again telling us that there is no relationship shown in this crosstab. On the other hand, using chi-squared, we see that there are two variables. These two variables gave us a statistical significance of 0.08042, implying that the responses from this data is representative of the population and not due to chance. ANOVA has also confirmed the significance for us. In the second crosstab, we can see that those who voted in the last election, 38.6%, support democracy more than those who voted and do not support it. Accordingly, there are more respondents that did not vote in the last election and therefore don't support democracy than there are respondents who did not vote and do support democracy. Therefore, this confirms our hypothesis. However, it is a very weak relationship as shown in our Kramer's V. I chose Kramer's V for this data because of the ordinal binomial in a rectangular shape data, and as a result, the measure of association is 0.6041. It turns out the statistical significance is too high at 1.5805, implying that this data was more of a result of chance than the representation of the population. The significance was validated by chi-squared and ANOVA. In my last analysis, as we can see in the crosstab, there is no significant pattern in the findings. To my surprise, the more people saying that the economic conditions are good in Malawi, 33.9%, actually do not support democracy. Accordingly, the tau c measure of association confirms that this relationship is very weak with a value of 0.02802. Also, with a value of 2.1468, the data is not significant. In the first relationship between present living conditions and the support for democracy, there was no association between the two variables. However, the relationship was marginally significant. In the second and third relationships, there is no association between the independent variable. Accordingly, there is no significance as the probability attained was too high to be acceptable. Since support for democracy is not significantly affected by living conditions, participation in the electoral process, and the economic conditions in Malawi, we may try to focus future studies based on other factors. Lars also suggests that democratic support also comes from political communities, regime principles, regime performances, and political actors. Perhaps those will be more beneficial than what we have studied today. Thanks for watching.